This is Uncommonly Remarkable, where we discuss the surprising everyday lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. My name is Artis Beatty. I am a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and the conversations held here are separate from my work with My Eye Doctor. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Uncommonly Remarkable. Today's guest is a senior manager for Audience Insight. He describes himself as analytical, creative, balanced, and compassionate. He's a great friend of mine and has a BA in classical archeology, which we're going to talk about, from UNC, as well as an MBA in marketing from Wake Forest. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, please welcome Adam Braxton to the show.
Thank you so very much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Adam, it's good to have you. I am surprised that we actually got you here because most of the time when I talk to you, I look for you, you're in some other country. Like, it's not like you're just out on vacation somewhere. You're in another country. And you always text me back. You're like, oh yeah, I'm in Belize. I'm building things. I'll talk to you later. So it's been an amazing few years for you with a lot of travel and a lot of learning things, I guess.
It has.
Cool. Well, we're going to talk a lot today about kind of what makes you Adam Braxton. And I really want to start that with maybe rewinding a little bit and talking about the fact that we've known each other for a very long time at this point.
That's right. This is the origin story, you know. Feel like a superhero.
So we were at UNC at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting because people don't know you have a twin brother. And you guys are identical twins. I'm very familiar with identical twins. My brothers are identical twins. But you guys split up, which I just don't understand how that works because my brothers did not do that. But you went to UNC, he went to NC State. And
great basketball year, by the way.
Oh,
this one. Yeah.
It was a good year. Yeah. Yeah. But they're very few and far between.
Right.
Well, when there's ready statistics about how long it's been, because that's kind of how they posted things, how long it's been, you think about it and you're like, oh yeah, I kind of remember it being that way. But anyway, we met at Carolina and in the same fraternity. So those were good days.
Those were very good days. There was a lot less pressure in life, I believe, at that point. But we hadn't really explored the world in so much or gotten through our professions or anything. So much potential at that point.
I agree. We were on different paths, though, because, I was all about the science and you were all about the archaeology, which talk to me about what was going on there?
Yeah, since you teed it off very well, I will take a step back to my twin brother. We were both fairly creative individuals growing up through high school. And I actually applied for and was accepted to the School of Design at NC State and was going to be an architect. For many years, this was a dream I had all throughout high school. But as Clay and I thought about where we would be going for school, we thought, it might be good to have a little bit of separation. And I grew up at Tar Heel all my life. It was a goal of mine to go to Chapel Hill, but also be an architect. And those two things do not reconcile very well. So Clay ended up going to State, and he now has a successful career working for IBM in graphic design, actually. So he did go through that creative aspect of it. And I started searching for what I thought sounded interesting. And this kind of gets back to a love of history. We used to read encyclopedias when we were boys, just those kinds of pouring through different books. And the classics were always, I was a big fan of that. But it was not the most practical aspect, right, of moving forward and seeing what you would do.
Sure.
It's a passion, and my parents were those lovely people who said, find something you love, find something you believe in, and you can do that and be happy. Now I work in marketing. So there's a bit of a path that evolved from there.
Yeah, it's reading encyclopedias. It's funny when you grew up with the Encyclopedia Britannica,
Right.
or World Book
We
Encyclopedia.
were World Book people.
We were
so,
World Book people as well.
Battle lines drawn here.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So we were World Book, and we had the nicely leather bound burgundy set.
We still do at my parents' house.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And
1985 edition, perhaps, I think. Yeah.
that is fantastic. And you kind of think about it today, right? Like at the palm of your hand, you've got all this information. But growing up, if you needed to know something, you had to go to the encyclopedia. And when your parents got encyclopedias at home, it saved you a library trip.
Absolutely.
And so, you read all these things, you learn all these sometimes random facts, and they just becomes the way you kind of understand the world.
Right.
And moving from a world of, I need this reference book, this is what I'm going to read, this is how I'm going to learn this, to a world where you can kind of think on a whim, oh, I want to learn about this and then learn about it, is just very different. So you're at Carolina, you're doing your thing, Clay's doing his thing. Where did the shift move to think about marketing, though, from where you were?
That's a little bit of a longer story, actually. I started looking for positions at museums while in college, right, afterwards. But, it was one of those of, should you go to grad school, probably should have prepared a little bit more for that at the time. But actually ended up getting a job at Explorus, which is now Marbles in
I had
downtown.
forgotten about Explorus.
Yeah. It was a multicultural museum about the world, founded by a gentleman whose grandfather, I think, founded the Museum of Art, Gordon Smith, fantastic philanthropist himself. And it had a wonderful mission. I think one of the issues was just kind of distilling that into something that the world in North Carolina was ready for at the time. There were some marketing aspects to it that were wonderful and approachable for middle school and younger kids, but also some harder lessons that were great for adults. And in concept, this sounds like something where everybody can learn more about those things. But it was also a lot to think about, at the time, where I think Marbles is kind of, it's a much easier concept to jump into.
That makes sense to me. I mean, we're talking late 90s. Right? Mm-hmm. Maybe 2000-ish. And the concept of learning in this way was not really something that was, particularly in Raleigh, people were really yet ready for. But you were thinking about taking your passion for history and learning and trying to figure out how to attract other people so that they could experience that.
You make it sound wonderful, phrased that way. And yes, much like archaeology, there was the concept of it and what it was. And Gordon was ahead of his time, I think, and thinking about that, it was really attractive. But I also needed a job, at the time. And at Carolina, I needed a major.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, there was a gentleman there named Alan Daniels who was starting an enterprise for Explorus.
Okay.
Selling furniture. Which is but it was really interesting furniture. He would go to different countries and he would work with different designers, and they created fairly traded furniture from Peru, Tanzania, Nicaragua, multiple places around the world. And we would travel to New York, San Francisco, and the exotic locale of High Point, which is where I was born. And we would sell lots of furniture, actually. And, that evolves to some help with marketing and an appreciation for business. And several iterations down the line from that, it wasn't a business internally that Explorus could support. And Explorus ended up as, now became Marbles. Mm-hmm. So Adam had to look for some different things to do. And I'll skip through a couple of that cycle because we only have so much time here. But my wife, who I met right before I turned 30, she's a virologist. So she studies different viruses and was completing her doctoral thesis at Carolina at the time. And she said, you've worked in these different businesses. You've been a consultant. Have you thought about your MBA? And then she bought me a book. She said, here, take the test, do it. And it's not without, I don't know if I would have had the intestinal fortitude to move forward without her support. So at that time, I was working for a coffee company, which had taken me to Nicaragua. actually. Some more travel, right, through this. And it was coming up into one of the recessions that we've had over this past several years. And my leader there at the time said, it's not going to be a great year for you when you work on commission. You might want to start thinking about other options.
Yeah.
So my wife was doing her postdoc in Winston-Salem. And I went over to Wake Forest and talked to them. And they said, there's a pattern in my life of being rescued, I think, and opportunity. And I've been blessed thoroughly with that, right? So I go in and I talk to admissions and they say, well, we just had somebody cancel. If you can take the admission exam and do well enough, and you've got about 2 weeks,
wow,
we'll put you in. And so I was like, great, I have a book already, And it worked out.
Wow. So people cannot see me giggling the entire time, but I am, because you're recounting the story as I actually remember it. Like, there are pieces that I had actually forgotten about. So I remembered Explorers. I remembered the transition for the MBA. I had forgotten about the coffee, though. And that was a really good phase.
It was quite a bit of fun. I was a trained barista judge, not a barista. I would never want to go into a coffee shop and make coffee for people at scale, but I was trained to judge them, actually. So I knew how they pulled shots. I knew how they foamed milk. I knew why they did it. And I went to competitions and acted, in some of those capacities.
Which, I almost think that's mean, like you would never pull coffee for people in mass, yet you judge the people that do. Well, and I feel like, I don't know. You should be forced to pull coffee for people before you get to judge them.
Absolutely. But the gentleman that I worked for was a big advocate in immersing yourself into what you do, Mm-hmm. And he said, we're going to send you to the plantation where they pick beans. We're going to train you. We're going to have you do roasts and cuppings every day. We're going to send you to the barista competitions. And, if you know the world, the people, then you will be much better at what you do and much more relational. And he was absolutely right.
Wow. So I can't let you off the hook about the archaeology because I'm stuck on it. I got to go back. So your particular field was classical archaeology.
Yeah, it was classical archaeology.
Okay, so can you talk about the different branches? Because that would be helpful.
Yeah, there are multiple types of archaeology and anthropology as well, too. So archaeology itself, you could take different countries typically and look at that, different civilizations of time. So we have ancient Greek archaeology, we have ancient Roman archaeology, we have ancient Egyptian archaeology, and those are just the main classical civilizations that we study. You, of course, could study any other civilization out there as well.
Wow.
Right? But classical would be defined as mainly Greek, Roman, and Egyptian.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense. This is just interesting because every time I talk to someone who's in another field, it's just interesting to think about the differences or the stratifications in that particular field. So you get very familiar with the specialties and subspecialties, the things that you touch every day. But when you're not touching those things, it's a much broader look at what's going on.
Right.
And so to hear that this was subdivided and this was a particular part of archaeology that you were studying is just interesting to me.
So there's another part to it too, where we think about generalists versus specialists, right? I've been a consummate B student for many years of my life, right?
Excellent.
I can do a lot of different things pretty well, but I don't master anything, or didn't at the time.
Yeah.
And within the archaeology space, I was becoming an expert of Minoan civilization, which is a subset of Greek, earliest times. And not just that, but the palace Knossos, which is like this huge maze, right? And not just that, but the court in the middle of the palace, right, where they would literally grab the bull by the horn, somersault over the top of it, and wrestle with the bull. And this is where the myth of Minotaur actually came, right? We can literally look at the myth and say, well, this is exactly what somebody from Greece would go back and tell their kids about, right? That's a specialist, right?
That is definitely a specialist.
And that was what I was going to do for probably the rest of my life if I stayed down that path. And it's not exactly the best fit for my broader interests.
Yeah. So here comes Explorers, then the coffee, then the MBA program,
and then now I work for Cisco. Couple of steps in between there. So I worked for an advertising agency that was in Winston-Salem, which was one of the top 5 agencies at the time. And I interned there while I finished my MBA. And that led to a position. But of course, my wife got a position in Durham, and mine was in Winston. So we commuted back and forth, or I did, while living basically in Raleigh at the time.
Yeah. Wow.
While looking for a place to stay, we settled in Hillsborough. I moved from that position with the ad agency. I followed my boss there to an auto conglomerate and led marketing for that group. Still marketing, right? And then went to another ad agency from that named Pace, which is one of the largest content agencies in Greensboro, and was a marketing strategist all of the time, but became a head of the group, the analytics group, because we had some trouble with analysts being able to articulate the numbers into real marketing strategy. So we put a head of strategy over it to say, this is how you can translate that. And I happen to have a good skill set of looking across the entire marketing ecosystem and understanding what goes on within it.
Wow.
And that's how I got hired at Cisco.
That's kind of crazy. We got to go back and talk about Sonny here just a little bit.
Yes.
Because
she's worth talking about.
Well, first of all, she's wonderful. She may be a little bit more wonderful than you.
I agree.
That's a whole different story.
I'm kind of wondering why I'm sitting here and not her.
Yeah. Well, mainly because she's always out in other places. She could also be a spy. I'm not sure.
She literally got back from Iceland today.
Yeah. It's just unreal. But to think about studying viruses.
She could be a spy.
She could be, because, I've seen a lot of TV, and it usually starts off with people traveling and, they're back from Iceland today. And were they really in Iceland, or why were they really there? Yeah, that kind of thing. But, she studying viruses in and of itself sounds incredibly difficult, a little scary. And you kind of want to understand, how do you get there and what does it involve? However, what's extremely interesting about that part of the story is that her work is global. And because of that, you guys have learned to raise a family in a variety of places.
Absolutely.
And I just think that is remarkable, because when you came and said, we're going to be moving, and I thought, oh, wow, finally, you guys are going to get closer to your work. It's going to be great. You're like, we're leaving. So talk a little bit about that, because, I won't spoil it for the listeners, but you guys have been in 40 plus.
She has been to 53 countries. I've been to 45. She went to 33 in 1 year alone. And I think I ended up hitting 24, 25 that year. But the kids have been to a good 17, 18 that year too. They have now traveled, and our kids are only 10 and 12, more than most people do in their lifetimes.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about that time period when you guys were making the decision that you're going to be the international Braxtons.
Yes, well, thank you. And indeed, I believe we have become that. It's part of both of our passions to travel as much as possible. Originally, when I met my wife, one of the first nights, she mentioned the possibility. She had a friend who worked on, I think, hemorrhagic fever in Rwanda, and she thought that was super cool. So in contrast, I actually got really lucky that we're not there now. And she instead works for a large biomanufacturing plant in the very safe realm of Holly Springs. But, there were different options ever since we met. She worked for Merck in Durham. And then she ended up taking a job with Biogen. And Biogen is one of the lead manufacturers for a Alzheimer's drug. Around the time of COVID, right, when that first started, they had already set up a plant in the beautiful country of Switzerland. And my wife started talking to a couple of people. They said they had a need, but we weren't sure whether it was going to happen or not. Basically, the window closed when COVID started, and then it opened back up. And all of a sudden, they said, "Hey, we need you guys to move over there." And so we did. We packed everything up and migrated over. Took both the boys. Had to find different accommodations for them for schooling. So.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other backgrounds is while we have traveled so many places, we have a child who is 10 that has an extremely rare disease called Vactorol, which affects 7 different midline systems within his body, and something called hydrocephalus. So this is probably closer to spina bifida. That's where he's seen as a clinic, right? He also has muscular hyperspasticity, and it affects the way that he walks and gets around. That's a completely different testimony in itself.
Yeah.
But there's a lot about the grace of God and us being provided with the opportunity to have him, but also deciding that we didn't want his life to be any less fulfilling as a result of it, and that we would not be held back. And we didn't want any other less opportunities for our older child as well during that, right? So we said, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it in the way we want to, and we're going to figure it out. So we moved to the town of near Basel, Switzerland, which is just on the border of Germany and France.
Okay.
It's in the north of Switzerland, right? In the first year of COVID that we were there, things were locked down, but there wasn't a lot of tourism that could come into Switzerland, which allowed us to see most of Switzerland.
Oh, yeah.
In the most beautiful light possible.
Because you were there and
Absolutely.
other people could not get there.
So the second year, we said, all right, we're only going to be here for 2 years. Let's go do everything we want to do. So we started planning the vacations. We would do different loops. So, I mentioned 30 some countries, but that's not like 1 week each in different ones, right? Some of these are, to give an example, we drove through France, took a ferry over to Ireland, met my mom in Ireland, drove around there for a few days and was able to see some beautiful parts of that. Took another ferry up to Scotland, did the same thing there, and then drove down through England, spent some time there, and drove back through the Channel and down through Luxembourg, Belgium, and back to Switzerland, all in a couple weeks.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
We did similar things driving up to all the way through Poland and Germany and Denmark and Sweden and back. We took a ferry to the Faroe Islands and Iceland. We drove down and did a loop through northern Italy. We lived near France and Germany, so we were able to go those a lot. And then my wife and I took a sabbatical in the middle of the trip, and we did, and that was without the kids.
Wow.
So we took a month off.
How do you manage that, though?
And this goes to the flexibilities of the jobs that we have, which is not something that everyone is granted the opportunity for. So we realized we're totally blessed with that capability. She had been at Biogen long enough that she was given a month off for sabbatical. And we were in Switzerland at the time. And so we said, let's do this. My job, I had an amazing supportive manager who lived in Germany previously for, I think, 9 years of her life. And so she knew the value of that expat type of assignment. And she was supportive of me. And Cisco, that I work for, telecommunications global company, right? We sell hybrid work capabilities, right? If we can't make it work, and we can't allow you to remotely work, then
who can, right?
Exactly. So I was able to take a month off unpaid, and we consider that an investment into this. And we went to Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Singapore, and then came back, picked the kids up, and then went for 2 more weeks to do some more countries.
Wow. So what was it like managing getting the kids into school,
Hmm.
and how did they feel about that? Given we're at a tender age, I guess, because they were probably what 8 and 6 or
Yeah,
somewhat
I
close.
think that's about right. Avery had started kindergarten, and COVID was good and bad for that, actually. The having to go back home and remotely learn for a few months before he went over to Switzerland was
Hmm.
actually really good training
Oh,
for understanding a different environment and having some flexibility. And those are some of the values we've wanted to impart to the kids is an ability to handle challenges. You can imagine with the amount of travel we've done through airports and subway systems and all things don't always work out,
yeah.
right? But they see our responses, our ability to stay cool in different situations.
Hmm.
And I think it's helped to temper their demeanors as well. But school was a little bit more challenging because the first school we asked to go to could not support Avery. They didn't have the infrastructure.
Okay.
And we did need to go to private schools in Switzerland because the public school system was purely in German, and none of us had any lick of German that we knew at the time. I do know a lot because we had to take classes while we were there. You actually have to pass a proficiency exam to stay in, or at least the spouse does, to stay in Switzerland.
Wait.
Yeah.
So Sonny's working, but because she was the one that had employment that was in Switzerland, you as the spouse had to be
Yes.
proficient in German to be able to stay.
Even though I have a full-time job with Cisco Switzerland, I had to pass an A2 or an A1 exam for German. I passed the A2.
Oh.
But, some of my bigger accomplishments were going to the post office and completing a transaction completely in German. It's the small wins that make a big deal.
That is not a small win. That is a huge win. That is a huge win.
I had a lovely Russian teacher who taught me German. She lived in Switzerland, and we would do virtual classes. And so she would call me up twice a week for 3 hours, and we would converse back and forth. And I was able to pick through some things. So
That's pretty amazing. So we have not traveled as nearly as many places as you traveled, but it's interesting to me that when you go to Europe in particular, that the U.S. is considered the continent, right? Like they say, they often refer to the U.S. as the continent. And you don't want to correct people and say we actually share it with 2 other countries, right? But it is the size of the U.S. versus the size of European nations and then Europe in general. There is such a contrast.
It's insane. Switzerland's about the size of North Carolina. It's not actually part of the EU. It's an island, actually surrounded by land and by the European Union.
Also interesting, right?
Yeah.
And I say that because in the US, speaking English, it's fine, and you don't necessarily have to have another language, right? Like you can go from border to border in a place that is several times the size of the entire European continent, right? And there's a common language. And then to our north, although French is part of the Canadian landscape, there are plenty of English-speaking provinces for Canada,
Absolutely.
right? And then to our south, Spanish is the language. However, there are very few places that you go in the U.S. and really need to be able to speak Spanish to be able to make it, right? And so the chances that you are going to learn a language to use in the U.S. other than English is relatively small.
Absolutely.
And versus being in Europe and obviously in Switzerland and having to, you need to learn to speak some stuff, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I would imagine there were a lot of English speakers anyway, right? Well, maybe not where you were.
There's enough. There's a few places where not at all. But we were so close to Germany and France too that everything in the supermarket was labeled both in French and in German. So I know a little bit of grocery store French, actually, as a result.
The limit of my French is bonjour. And we recently, it's been a year now, we were in Paris, and we did the Channel Legault to London, and we've actually digressed for a second. For us to go to Europe, we couldn't really pick a place as much as we just said, here we want to go, and we had this big circle, and then we land in one place, and then we take the trains to go to other places. So we've seen a lot of different parts of the UK, as an example, via train. And it's really cool because you see the countryside that you would never see otherwise. And you get to actually interact with people. And it's just a great way for us to do it. But anyway, when we went to Paris, we were all excited, and I was a little bit fearful because I don't speak any French, and because French is not easy. There are a lot of letters that you don't use. And I couldn't figure out which ones were the useful ones and which ones were not the useful ones. And so reading it is just very, very difficult for me. And we have a neighbor who is, her family is French. And she said, look, the rules are when you go to a shop or a restaurant, your job is to say bonjour, because they don't greet you. You need to greet them.
If it's in the evening.
Yes. And so we said, okay, well, we'll do that. And so we were the best bonjours ever. And it was extraordinary. Like, people were so nice. And apparently we got good at bonjour because people would then start speaking to us in French, and we'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Do you speak English? And they were like, of course. And so we would get through. And so I actually ventured out as an English speaker on my own, because, I'm an early riser. And I wanted early morning
Best
coffee.
Best time to walk around, by the way.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Absolutely.
And but I had to go into a little cafe, and there was no English, and we made it through, right? So by the end of this thing, I felt really good. I would not have passed the A1 test like you did, though.
But that is what travel should be, right? Going out there, challenging yourself, meeting other people in the culture. Having that experience, and it makes your life fuller.
It does. It really does. Because, in the end, I really enjoyed the experience. I also learned that that Paris was not as scary as I thought it would be. That I need to do myself the favor of learning more French, difficult as it may be because of all the extra letters. But it really does give you a different perspective to be able to do that. And we met some wonderful, wonderful people who were just so nice to us and very kind, And it's interesting to me that they're just nice people, good people, no matter where you are.
That is universal. And what I love is you're also challenging the stereotypes that Parisians typically have as well. They are lovely people if you go out there and converse and meet different things. I will say, despite that, there are some people in different places that are even more accommodating. The peoples of Japan are some of the most friendly people I've ever met in my life. The peoples of Belize in South America are just, it's like your family, just about.
Where you were recently.
We were recently, yes. We had the opportunity to do a mission trip in Belize. I grew up, my mother in the church, and my father also in the church. We traveled a lot around. He was a salesperson earlier on in life, and we would travel all through the South, basically. Nothing too exotic, but then my mother would do mission trips to different places, and we started doing that when I was in high school. So we went to Jamaica, went to Spain, drove out to Arizona to do some work with Native American tribes that were there. And this is something I told my wife about, right? And that was one of the things that we've just started doing back again. We've traveled so much, and we've been able to see so much of the world, but now we're taking it to a different point of being able to give back. And this trip that we went to Belize was funny because most of the times you go with the church group. So we contacted an organization and met with the pastor there, and they were like, okay, so what can you guys do? You could preach a sermon, you could run a Bible school, we're like, no, sorry, we're a family. We don't have any of those wonderful skills, respectfully. So they were creative with us, and we ran a reading school for some local children that were there, for about 24 of the children, pairing them up and reading with them. Even our youngest kids could do that.
Oh, wow.
We painted at a local school,
Mm-hmm.
painted the bathrooms, which were very much needed. We did a lot of visits to different individuals, more of a pastoral type of thing. One woman was an amputee. One gentleman, and this is, forgive me for the short story, but we went out to visit a gentleman and his family. He had 12 children, 10 were still alive, and he lived in a very modest house, right? But all of his family was there, and he said to me, and I quote him literally, he said, "I am not a wealthy man, but I am a rich man." And then he had, I think, one of his grandsons climb up a tree beside the house and pull down fresh coconuts, cut them open, gave us some of the best bananas I've ever had in my life.
Oh,
And
wow.
all that he asked for was a prayer, in return.
That's amazing.
And he was a well digger by trade, and he had shingles and was dealing with it at the time. And things were hard, but he called me sir the whole time. He had humility, he had faith, he had in his mind what he needed, and that's one of the reasons why we're kind of switching. We're still going to get. We're going to Hawaii this year,
Mm-hmm.
so we're still doing other. We're going to Alaska. But we're going to do a mission trip every year as well too.
That's pretty incredible, and I wasn't making that up. Like the literal story was that I texted you. I said, "Hey, I'd love to have you come on to the show," and I waited. I thought, maybe he doesn't want to come on the show, and he's trying to figure out how to tell me. And then you go, "Oh, I'm sorry. We were painting a school in Belize." And I was like, "What?" And then you told me what was going on, and I just thought that was amazing. But it's not atypical of when I go to look for you, because I think I have an affinity for finding you when you're not actually here.
You contacted me when we were in the Galapagos over
I
break.
did.
Yes, yes. And we were able to go. That was on my wife's bucket list for many years, and we went down to Ecuador and then over to the Galapagos and did a boat tour there and saw some of the most amazing, diverse, flora and fauna I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
And then, like 2 weeks after we got back from Ecuador, I think a war basically broke out, and it's been a more dangerous place
It's
since.
unbelievable.
So good timing.
Unbelievable. So Adam, we've talked about a lot of really interesting things about kind of your life journey. I did not know that you painted, though, not just the bathroom in Belize, but actual painting.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been doing that recently?
I've done a little bit more since in the past 2 years, but not a lot. When I was in high school, it was something that really calmed me and relaxed me. And then I took a few painting classes while I was at Carolina, and I had an amazing French guest artist who was my teacher there. And she basically was like, throw everything out, come back with anything you can find in your rooms, in your dorms, and just paint with it. Get creative, get to feel the paint, just so I painted on tape backwards, flipped it over, and would do like a series across the board. I filled up a syringe with painted water and basically drew things.
Oh, wow.
It was stuff like that, right? Where she wanted us to really think outside the box. And there's also some times with acrylics or oil that we would be able to kind of get back into it. And I loved that part of my life. I put it down for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then Cisco, which I want to say also provides us with something called Time to Give, which is the couple of weeks that you can volunteer out of your time that they will pay for in addition to your vacation to go and serve people. So we're able to do some of these opportunities because of that very generous offer. They also, do groups every once in a while. And we were looking for things that we could do online with each other. And we did a painting class, and I was in Switzerland at the time, right? I think I did it at like 10 o'clock at night or something,
Oh, wow.
But that was fine. My schedule was, pretty much from 2 to 10 most evenings. And I I was like, wait, I remember this. I enjoy this. This is calming. This is creative. And so I've been able to do it a couple times since and would like to continue on with that.
That's awesome. If you had a word of advice for anyone who is kind of thinking about where they are today and where they want to be, what would you give them?
Ooh. We plan, but we also just go and do. We were nervous moving during COVID to another country, right?
Who wouldn't be?
Who wouldn't be? Exactly. Many things, but we said to each other, we can't not do this, right? And every little time we do it, we get more comfortable. And, so find that corner of the paint, of the canvas that you can begin to paint in. You don't have to paint it all right now, Find the corner that you can work on and build over time. Take some dares, take some challenges in it. Know where you think you're going to go. But every time you paint another part of that and you build it, you feel more confident.
That's incredible advice.
Thank you.
That's incredible advice. So I have to thank you for spending time with me.
It's been a pleasure.
I'm glad I could find you and that you could find time. It's awesome. I also have to figure out how to get Sonny to come and have conversation, because not only is she just wonderful, I'm really now curious about this virology thing.
I am here because of her. And that's one of the bigger advices I would say too, is partner up. Find someone that supports your dreams, but also different from you, and let them challenge you.
And if you've enjoyed listening today, then first, thank you for taking the time to have a conversation with Adam and me. But like and subscribe so you don't miss any of the new stuff, and make sure you tell a friend. That way we can make sure everyone is listening to some of these wonderful people on Uncommonly Remarkable. Thank you.